Well, good morning. This is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred. Really glad you could join me today out here in the vegetable garden. Well, the Lord has provided a beautiful day today. You know, it's October 18th. You know, I had a really nice garden season. You know, the gardens just flourished out there in the garden this summer, and the garden season just went by really quick. But anyhow, you know, now that it's fall season, I thought today that I would take you on an early fall garden tour. So thanks for joining me today out here in the vegetable garden. You know, it's a beautiful day here today. I woke up, it was 39 degrees here this morning, and so, you know, I still have to do some harvesting out in the garden. I still have some peppers to harvest, and I have a lot of my summer squash, and I have some Cushaw squash and some butternut squash I have to harvest out here. You know, before we're here in Pennsylvania, Zone 6, and, you know, we're getting near our frost date. And so I need to do a lot of harvesting. But before I do that, I just thought I would take you for a quick tour through our garden. You know, behind me here is one of my favorite plants out in the vegetable garden, and that's the Sun Gold cherry tomato that's been growing in our garden all summer long. And they're just so sweet, and it's something I would really encourage you to think about growing in your garden. I have like 5 plants of these. And I do have a lot stored in my freezer. You can store them in 1-gallon freezer bags, and so it works out really well. So anyhow, why don't I show you around our garden and take a look at some of these peppers right behind me in my 18 by 30 foot garden bed there. So follow me along. And so right in front of me here, I have a couple rows of my King Arthur green bell peppers. You know, I grow these underneath my 6 mil polyethylene plastic. They really do well here in the garden. You know, the peppers and I have eggplant on the end. They just love heat, you know, and their feet being warm. And so the black plastic, it holds in the soil moisture, it suppresses the weeds, and it warms up the soil early in the season. And but these King Arthur green bell peppers, I've been harvesting from them all summer long, and they've really done really well. And also my eggplant on the end here. And here also in front of me is where I grew some of my plum crimson tomatoes and my mountain spring tomatoes. My wife and I, we canned like 75 quarts of tomato sauce and some zesty salsa. And so, you know, we just love our homemade tomato sauce. And also here in front of me, underneath my row cover, I have some gypsy variety broccoli growing right now. And but let's take a closer look at some of these peppers, and then I'll show you the broccoli there underneath the row cover. And so these are some of my green bell peppers, the King Arthur variety. I have to harvest all these in a couple days before a frost comes. And then also on the end over here is where I have some of my eggplant, some of the classic eggplant variety. And so here right in front of me is where I have my low tunnel hoop house. I use my 1/2 inch rigid conduit here, the metal one. on this particular low tunnel hoop house, and I have it covered with some of my spun bonded polyester. But under here is where I have my gypsy broccoli. It's a good heat tolerant variety. It's a short growing variety, which is great for planting in the fall. I planted these like the second week of August, and right now the heads are about 3-4 inches in diameter. Maybe in a couple weeks I'll do a harvest video on this, but anyhow, they're really thriving under there. You know, the row covers protect the plants from the cabbage butterfly. You know, that yellow butterfly you see, yellow whitish butterfly you see flying around the garden. So, you know, they lay eggs under the leaves and then develop into worms, which are really destructive on the brassica plants, you know, like your kale and collard greens and this broccoli. But under the row cover, they're really protected. It's a nice micro environment. You know, water passes right through, so you can water them with your hose, or the rain will just pass right through. So it's really well worth the time up front in your garden season to install these hoop houses. And so let's take a look at some of the garden behind me here. In this section back here, right behind me, I have my Sweet Million tomato plant. They're indeterminate tomato plants, which means they just keep on growing up as a vine. You know, they can grow 8 to 12 feet or longer, but you know, these will last right up until your first frost. And so this is the first time I planted this in my garden, and they did really well here. And I also have a lot of these frozen in our freezer. My wife and I will use these in our beans or in our chili, and they work out really well. But you know, I really like having arbors in my garden. You know, you can grow things vertically and save a lot of space in your garden. And I planted 2 of these Sweet Million transplants, and again, they did really well. I did a couple of videos on how to planting these, and also a taste test between the Sweet Million and the Sun Gold Cherry tomato. And then also here in front of me, I have some more peppers. I have some, and also some kale back there, and some red beets. So let's take a look at those. So behind me here is where I have my kale underneath this row cover here. And then I have some kale back there as well, and then also some red beets. But right in front of me here, I have some of my Hungarian hot wax peppers. You know, they've done, again, something really easy to grow in the garden, and we've been harvesting from these all summer long. But let's take this row cover off the end of this low tunnel hoop house and take a look at this beautiful curly leaf kale that I have under here. And so let's take a closer look at this kale. How's Bailey doing today? You joining me out in the garden? You know, one of my favorite things about growing vegetables out in the garden is that you can just walk around and just pick the fresh vegetables right off the plants. You know, the nice thing about kale too is that once the frost hits the kale plants, you know, they turn nice and sweet. Now, we haven't had any frost yet, but Honestly, these really don't taste bitter. Anyhow, I picked a nice young tender shoot, you know, which they always taste a little bit better. But anyhow, let's take a look at some of my sweet potatoes that are growing right behind me. It's the Covington variety. And the deer come in this time of year and eat the leaves off the plant, which helps me when it comes to harvest time. But you know, you can also eat the leaves on a sweet potato plant. You know, they're very edible. I put some of them in my smoothies sometimes. They don't seem to have a lot of flavor, but nevertheless, I'm sure they're very nutritious. And then also right behind me, I have to harvest some of my striped cushaw plants. So let's take a look at those as well. Over on the other side of my outdoor garden structure, I have some Malabar spinach growing, and also some of my sun gold cherry tomatoes growing up alongside them. So let's go take a look at those. So over on this side, I grew my Malabar spinach up here. I ended up buying these seeds from an Ace hardware store locally, and you know, typically if you grow spinach in the early, like Bloomsdale spinach in the early spring, it'll bolt when the heat comes. But this is called Malabar spinach. I did a video on how to plant this, and also I did a video on harvesting these. But you know, one of my favorite things to do was to take a couple of these leaves and take a sun gold cherry tomato, and you just make like a little wrap with it and eat it right off the vine. Very healthy and nutritious. Again, I just love coming out here, eating vegetables right off the plant. You know, this is where my grocery store is. But anyhow, the Malabar spinach grew up the side of my outdoor garden structure. And then I also, again, have a sun gold cherry tomato that I grew right up alongside it. And so they do very well here on the end of my garden structure. So let's just take a closer look at these beautiful plants. Hi Bailey, how you doing, boy? So right up here is where the Malabar spinach is. I built like a 2-foot by 8-foot trellis out of 1x3s, and then I just added chicken wire to it, and so it just keeps on growing right up it. Again, alongside it, you can see I have my sun gold cherry tomatoes. And then I also have some elephant ears there on the end of the garden structure as like a focal point. But a lot of these cherry tomatoes, I already have enough frozen, but unfortunately a lot of them just fall to the ground. But that Malabar spinach just keeps on growing and growing. Something I would really encourage you to grow in your garden. Another favorite of my plants to grow in the garden, or to plant year after year, is my red Camel Lilies. Sometimes it's a tongue twister to say those. But anyhow, what's nice about these Camel Lilies is you end up digging them up every year. You know, once the heavy frost hits them, I come and just cut them right even with the ground. And then I put them in Tupperware containers, large plastic containers, and just store them down in my basement, anywhere where it doesn't freeze. Now, I think initially I paid like $4 a plant for these. And I have like 20 of these or more scattered or planted throughout the garden. It adds a nice tropical look, a lot of grace, a lot of color. You know, they're a good pollinator. You know, the hummingbirds love the color red. They attract them. And so having the canna lilies and also the elephant ears, you know, I dig them up once the frost hits them and store them down in my basement in the garage. I've also did videos on, you know, how to store them and all down in your basement. But anyhow, again, something I would really encourage you to maybe plant a few in your garden. They just add a lot of nice color and drama to your garden. And so let's just take a quick walk over there. We'll take a look at my cattle panel trellis, where I had grown 2 of my sun gold cherry tomatoes up. You know, the cooler weather really did some damage on these cherry tomatoes, but nevertheless there still are a few tomatoes that we can harvest from them. But let's go take a look at that. So follow me over there. So this is the cattle panel trellis that I grew 2 of my cherry tomatoes up. The cattle panel's like 50 inches high by 16 feet long. I ended up buying it from Tractor Supply Company nearby for like $22. In fact, I did a video on how you can build one of these for like $45 in your garden. They're just a beautiful, graceful, arched trellis. And you also need 4 of your fence T-posts, metal fence T-posts, maybe a couple 4 or 5 footers. But the video I did really helps explain how you install it. But these cherry tomatoes have done really well here. Let's take a little closer look at some of these withering tomatoes on the vine here. Thankfully, among some of these withered tomatoes, there still are some that are definitely edible. I just can't get over how sweet these are. A lot of sugar in these, a lot of natural sugar, which makes these very edible. We also love them in our salads. My wife makes these bean and rice wraps. And you know, tortillas, and we wrap them up inside that, cut them in half, and add them to those as well, and put them in the microwave for a couple of minutes, heat everything up, and they're really tasty. Well, anyhow, I just want to thank you for joining me today out here on my early fall garden tour. It's again a beautiful day. It's nice and cool out. I just love wearing my flannel shirt out here in the garden. And anyhow, if you have any questions or comments about this video, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And you can also visit us at plantsmartliving.com. And there you can learn more about gardening and also how you can reclaim your health by adopting a whole food, plant-based, vegan lifestyle. Well, anyhow, I hope you have a wonderful day today. Thanks for joining me out in the garden. So until next time, this is Plant Smart Living with Farmer Fred.